Every patient writes their own story. There is no single narrative that fits everyone. So it's a lot of information that I need to get, not just the genomic information, but where does the patient live? Who do they live with? What is their social support like? But I also wish that it was much easier to kind of put all of those together so that I can create the story without spending so much time trying to find the story.
There's an increasing rise in the cost of medicine. There's an increasing shortage of the number of physicians. It's a very urgent time to be able to leverage these technologies to help with that cognition so that we can provide more care, better care at scale.
If we take away all these things that take up all our time, make things much more seamless, it's much better for us and for our patients.
Modern cancer care often breaks down in the margins. This conversation explores where that happens the most and what can be done about it. My guest today is Dr. Nagashree Seetharamu, a thoracic oncologist at Northwell Health and associate professor at the Zucker School of Medicine. In this episode, we talk about how lung cancer has become deeply individualized and why no two patients ever follow the same path. We examine where the cognitive load of care really shows up and the sheer effort it takes to reconstruct a patient's story. Finally, we explore what clinicians actually want from AI as memory, continuity, and a quiet nudge to ensure nothing important falls through the cracks. This conversation reframes progress as much more than innovation. It's about making complex care sustainable. Let's get started. I know there's so much innovation happening in oncology and specifically in thoracic oncology. One of the things is that, treatment has become incredibly biomarker driven and longitudinal. So I was wondering if we can kind of start with just like, where are you seeing the innovation happening, right? Like if you had to kind of summarize, the new standard in lung cancer today, what do you think are like the two or three kind of biggest shifts that we're seeing? And, what do people like patients or even clinicians, what do you think they really misunderstand about modern lung cancer treatment?
First of all, I think, we know that lung cancer is not just one disease. We know that it's a collection of a very heterogeneous group of conditions, which is, mostly genomic driven, but it's not just that. I think even within the genomic subdivisions, we have subgroups of patients, each of who have a different trajectory. In fact, I would say every patient writes their own story. There is no single narrative that fits everyone. And that's very different from where we started. Everybody used to get the same type of treatment, and we were not seeing the same outcomes for everyone. And now we understand why that is the case. So the shift in genomically driven, treatments has led us to make sure that we have the genetic profiling of the tumors as soon as the diagnosis is made. It's part of the diagnostic workup. It's part of the narrative we discuss with patients. And then in addition to that, we now have the immunotherapy. So we have additional biomarkers. Now we have antibody drug conjugates. So we have more biomarkers. On top of that, it's not just the tumor, right? It's also the patient. Who is the patient that we're talking about? What are their comorbid conditions? Where are they coming from? What other things that I need to know about my patient? And moreover, it's not a one-man show anymore. It's a multidisciplinary approach. So what are the other providers saying? I can't decide for a patient in unison. It's a partnership. The patient, their caregivers have a big say, but also the other providers that they are seeing. So all of this, to kind of, put that into an algorithm is kind of very patient specific. So we have so much data coming in from multiple angles, and all of that needs to be collated and made sure that we don't miss a single point within all of these, data that is coming in before we make our treatment decision or make changes in the plan.
Yeah. I think, bringing up the whole patient's perspective of it is so important. I think, as the treatments are getting more and more complex and there's more and more tests that you have to do and, precision medicine is getting more and more precise, it becomes this level of complexity that becomes very difficult for an individual practicing physician to be able to keep up with and comprehend and, execute on a daily basis. I think it's super interesting that, as a non-clinician, right, you think that medicine is, there's these guidelines, and you just put a patient in the guideline. You get told what to do, and you follow the guideline. But when I talk to practicing oncologists like yourself, it's not so evident, right? And it's frequent when these guidelines really stop mapping clearly to the patients that are sitting right in front of you. And I'm curious if you kind of bring us into the fold on some of those situations, right? Like, how often do you find yourself kind of making these judgment calls in your practice? And more so, like, where do you think AI can really help with that?
Every single day, every single minute, these judgment calls are necessary. No one follows a textbook, right? I mean, it is important to kind of understand that. I just feel like, oh, I wish I had right now with all, it's memory driven. A lot of this is in the memory. I say, I know a patient, I know, their entire family, I know what comorbidities they have. I know the genomics, it's written down there, but did I capture the entire thing? That's also evolving. Did we do, the additional biomarkers? A lot of times, we try to capture that. Right now, everything is put in manually into the note. There is use of technology. I'm not saying we don't use it, but at the same time, I think it's heavily dependent on a person. Now, let's say I take, I'm off for a week. Now my colleague is looking at this, and they are dependent on the note that I put in. So it's everything that I put in there, which I understand. A lot of times there may be some things in there that kind of, that only I know. So they are looking at it, and a lot of times they may have to call me to clarify, etc. I wish there was a way to capture all of this information and put it there that kind of makes it easier to understand a note, not too cumbersome. Right now, it's very wordy. You have to read the whole thing too, and it's not in any itemized format. So everything is kind of, embedded. I know where to look at. I know where stuff lay in my note. My colleagues know where they put their stuff in their note, but it's not homogenized. So those are the things I feel like I can help, kind of streamline those. And then you have the patient characteristics. What was the creatinine the last time? I have to click a number of buttons to make sure. Oh, let me look at that. The patient was hospitalized. What exactly happened? I have to open another platform to see what happened to the patient in the hospital. They were given a different medication by a different provider. Where do I find that? I had to click on the physician's note. None of this is kind of collated. It's all kind of done manually. So that takes up a lot of time. It's a helpful exercise. So I know that all of these things happened, but I also wish that it was much easier to kind of put all of those together, so that I can create the story without spending so much time trying to find the story. And then spend more time with the patient talking about how we're going to use all of that and make recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, I think, therein lies the real problem that I think we have an opportunity to really solve with AI, right? Like, being able to traverse mass amounts of fragmented information and figure out, what is the needle in the haystack that is actually relevant for, whatever information you're trying to look for, what's relevant for this specific patient in this specific moment. I think AI has a very tremendous opportunity to really help with that. When I kind of looked at the workflow, outside looking in, one of the things that I found just so amazing is just, how well the system works today, relying on just memory, right? Like, you guys are really the heroes that are being able to juggle everything from writing down all the information that is, useful, not just for the patient's care, but for billing and for all the other kind of downstream teams that you guys have to keep in mind. And at the same time, keeping up with all the guidelines and all the changing therapies and being able to, compartmentalize all of this and synthesize all this information to make your decisions. And it's amazing how well the system works, and how long we've kind of gone relying on this human cognition to be able to do, what we do today. But I feel like, one of the trends that we're seeing is that at a certain point, it's going to fail, right? We're seeing kind of this crisis in medicine where there's an increasing rise in the cost of medicine. There's an increasing shortage of the number of physicians. And I feel like, it's a very, urgent time to be able to leverage these technologies to help with that cognition so that we can provide, more care, better care, at scale.
Yeah, no, definitely. You hit all the right points. I think, a lot of time the burnout is really because of that particular issue. Just getting all of this, spending a lot of time just charting, and that's just remembering what actually happened a few minutes ago. And then at the end of the day, you're trying to kind of, make sure that you remember every single discussion that you had, unless you try to jot down at the moment. And sometimes there are competing requirements. There may be somebody calling me from the treatment room. I get, there are interruptions. So to keep all of that, to rely completely on memory, thankfully so far it's been okay. But I think it's a challenge. And as we hear more and more about treatments and the little nuances in how these treatments are tailored for individuals, you want to be up there. You want to get up to speed. But if you're still struggling with the daily, like how to get from one point to another, you will never be able to get. So if there are tools that can help me with the routine stuff, I can get to the next level. I can be able to, do research or do other things, teaching, etc., which I enjoy.
Yeah, and I feel like, especially coming from where your vantage point is, at kind of large cancer centers like yours, there are very complex teams and handoffs, right? Where do you see like either time or kind of that clarity and that thought process being sacrificed the most? Like, where do you think these drop-offs happen most frequently, and are the largest opportunities for AI to help? Are there like specific areas in the handoffs or the specific areas in that value chain?
Great question. I can think of quite a few. Inpatient to outpatient transition is a very common example. Even though it's within our own system, sometimes, not everything is relayed to us and not everything is documented. A lot of time the patient fills in the gaps, which is okay. I don't think, we're missing at the end of the day, but it requires a lot of detective work on our part to make sure, what exactly happened. This is, this is what the patient went in for, what happened, why did they stay for this extra day, and then you hear about all these things from the patients, like, where is that, which person, in whose notes can I find that information? It is somewhat confusing. If a patient is transferring from another institution, that is a nightmare. I just had a patient who transferred from another health system to us, and we had to get the records. There was like, they sent it to me, and I'm like, looking at it, it was just a PDF. I was like, okay, let's just print it. And my nurse started printing it, and it went on and on and on and on. And I was like, what is going on here? There were 1,165 pages of it. Okay, all right, let's stop this. We're not going to kill any more trees. But, all of this was just vital signs, or, like day 1, day 2, day 3. There was no summary of anything. So can we do better with this? Can we get a summary of what happened that is relevant? A lot of this is, a nurse came, they're like, okay, patient was alert and oriented. AO times 3, checked, asked them questions. They were doing okay. That's it. That's a note. And that's a whole page. So, do I need that? I definitely don't. So it's kind of hard to tease out what is important and what is not when you get so much of information. So it will be helpful. That's another example. Tumor boards. Our tumor boards happen all the time. We document it. But it would be great if tumor board could be documented as it happened, with everything, multidisciplinary input. Because a lot of times, I may have missed something, like someone may have said something, or I might have missed documenting that. So these are things that I feel like are few examples, but it's a work in progress a lot of times. And now your eye is trained to look at relevant things and just capture relevant things. But even then, it takes a while. Even after all these years, I just find it extremely difficult to kind of go through a paper chart or paper printout of a document to get all the information.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's where the opportunity really is for, ambient to really evolve, right? I mean, today it's about, you know, typically it's just unburdening doctors from their documentation in the ambulatory setting, right? And as you kind of expand out, what is that core technology useful for today across all the different, parts of the patient's journey or the physician's day, where information is shared, it's retrieved, it's, some inference happens where it needs to be summarized, right? And the basic core technology of being able to summarize vast amounts of information or being able to retrieve information and find the information that you need, it really comes from how do you actually pull as much data as you can into this, consistent latent space for an algorithm to be able to kind of go in and call from. Right. So, I feel like that happens today. Like doctors are literally doing that today, right? They're going through the 1,064 pages that you said and looking for the discharge summary, right? But, really it should be, hey, like, is the discharge summary in any one of these pages? And an algorithm should be able to pull that up and then put that into your note, right? So I think, it's these useful applications that you shared. I do think that they are kind of just on the edge on where it's going to go. In thoracic oncology, patients often have like, these year-long treatment journeys. And, we had discussed, before the podcast, this idea of being able to kind of surface information when it's important, right? I'm asking you, like, what would you want in like an ambient AI to be able to surface at the point of care or at the point in which these decisions are made over time? What context do you kind of find yourself regularly kind of recreating manually before visits and, wish you could have had just, served to you on a silver platter?
A lot of things. So right now we kind of have an inverse chronological order of how things or chronological order of how things happened. But then at the end of the day, you're like, oh my God, it's so much, like I don't even know what happened where. And it's like, we write a date, what happened on that particular day. It's not very helpful. It can be collated, like this is what the patient started out with. This is when the diagnosis was made, just bulleted points that are important to me in a logical order. That would be very helpful. What treatments the patient has received, when was it started, when was it stopped, was there an interruption, if you want to dig a little deeper, what doses were given, at different time points, and then the genomic information, which may be updating, we may have done an NGS testing back in the day in 2018 when the panel was not that expensive. Now it might have been repeated. There might have been some changes. Did we capture all of that in a way where it's not cluttering my node, but if I want to go there, I have that access. I know exactly, but it's in the same space where I'm working. I don't have to click buttons to go on different windows, different platforms. Everything should be there. And lastly, the whole thought process, from the very beginning, where the patient started out, the social history, etc., whatever is important for the patient, and the discussions that we have had that is patient facing, obviously, should be there. It's very helpful to have like a nice social discussion with the patient. Oh, the patient, just came back from, Argentina. How did you, like all of that information that we like to kind of have the human side to it, should still be there. But, a lot of times, all of this other information, some scans were done in the meantime. What happened to those, and serial order, how the scans have evolved over time. Can you summarize that? So I can think of a lot of things that could be done differently than what we do today. Like you said, everything is within our cranial circuits. It's everything is. I put all those algorithms together in my head, and communicate with the patients. Today, that seems to be okay. what about a few months or years from now? Will I still remember, when I have, seen 100 more or 200 more patients, will I still remember to that granular extent? I don't know. So far, it's worked out. But like you said, somehow we make it happen. But with evolving technologies, I think, we should move with it. And if you have if this is available, like I said, we can focus a little bit more on things that actually matter to our patients.
Totally. I'm curious how you think like the those tools manifest, right? Like, do they look like kind of a chat experience like you see with ChatGPT, where if you can ask it any question that you want and it's able to answer it for you? Do you see it as something that's more of a structured summary where it's trying to predict what information is useful for you and kind of putting it into some sort of place that is always there for every patient? Do you view it as kind of just like a nudge where it's like a pop-up that only if we think it's going to be super useful? Like, how do you see that interaction really happening in a way that is actually useful?
Yeah, see, that's where the challenge lies. I'd like it to be more of a nudge than an actual narrative that tells me or directs me or gives me a hint as to what might be the best option. That's how I work. A lot of times, I do not follow the textbook because a patient is not a textbook. A lot of times, it's very dependent on the discussions that I'm having with them. Now, if there is a summary page that tells me, okay, you have all the staging, you click all the staging, and then all the mutations come up, and then these are the studies that are available in the neighborhood, you put in your institutions, and this is what the NCCN guidelines say. I probably will, like the ability to think outside the box has become somewhat limited. I like all that information, but it should be in a place where I can access it. Ultimately, I do think it would be very helpful that for the tool to understand each user and tailor to their needs. So understand me as a person and think like me, and be able to construct a plan like me, which is very like I'm training, the system to kind of work like I would by myself, and that would be very different than how the next person would be. So a uniform, if you're really talking about something that's going to be very similar to everyone, I would rather have it as as buttons that you can click at this time.
That's really good feedback. And I think it aligns with, what we spent a lot of time talking about on this podcast, right? Not all physicians practice medicine the same way, right? And, I think the old adage of healthcare is it needs to be integrated into the workflow. And the problem for building something like that is that everyone's workflow is different. And so there's this really long tail of things that you need to do or be able to make the product work to be able to drive, meaningful levels of adoption onto any tool. And I think you're spot on, right? It's like maybe the answer is not just one thing, right? You need the ability to do all these things in all these different form factors because it might fit into people's workflows, very differently. And I think that's spot on. The nudges is something that like I'm really curious about, right? And you brought up nudges around being able to remind you of some of the social aspects of the patient, or being able to remind you of maybe testing that might be missed, or more of like a pre-chart summary for you. If you had to pick like one nudge that you would say, hey, like this is the most frequent thing that I'm seeing in my department that often gets missed, but has like the highest form of impact. Like, what would that nudge be, right? Like, if you had this magical wand that can just nudge all your doctors to do one thing.
I would say is the genomic data, the NGS testing. It should be very easy, but right now we have to click a couple of buttons to get to it. And sometimes it's not in the same platform. We do liquid biopsies, we do tissue-based biopsies. They're in different areas. And even to look at the results, it may be uploaded, or it may be present in different sections. So it's easy to kind of, miss it if you're not looking for it. And some of it is like very hidden text. Everything is done. So, unless you actually look for it or you have an eye for it, it's easy to kind of miss it. So that to me, is perhaps the number one thing that because it is, like we said in the beginning, it's a very heterogeneous disease and it's very genomically driven at this point. So those are things that I obviously wouldn't want to miss.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I think, I read an ASCO study that said that, 30 to 40% of patients that, actually get these tests don't actually get on to the targeted therapies that they should be on. And, oftentimes these tests aren't even ordered in the first place. And so it's like, it's very hard to stomach the fact that the technology exists or the science exists to have a better treatment for that patient, but the patient isn't getting on it just because you know the information wasn't there at the moment in which that decision was made. And yeah, I think the nudges, depending on how it's implemented, has a real opportunity to be able to close that gap. So the next question I wanted to ask you is like, we're seeing kind of the survival rates in cancer beyond 5 years are really starting to climb. I think now they're over 70%. Even though we've made a lot of progress, there's still a lot more to go, right? What changes do you see, or what changes do you think need to be happen in order for us to get to 80% or
Yeah.
beyond? And what do you see as kind of the reasons for the improvements in thoracic oncology long term survival?
Yeah, no, I think, we kind of focus a lot on late stage disease and treatments, but I think prevention, early detection, perhaps, is probably would be a better driver or maybe a stronger driver for survival in the future. Can you do that? Again, I'm pretty sure there'll be newer platforms that'll be incorporated into our workflow, blood-based, genomics, radiomics, etc. We'll probably have all of that information come in. So that's number one. Number two is, like you said, like a lot of people don't even get to the treatments that they're supposed to get because somehow we didn't act on it for whatever reason it may be. So just making sure that every patient equitably is able to get the type of treatment that they are supposed to get. Now we have multiple choices, right? I mean, for each indication, we have 10 drugs that are approved. So at least one of them, the appropriate treatment that is offered to patients. And then number three is, making sure that patients are able to participate in clinical trials whenever that is appropriate. A lot of times it is, like the barrier could be distance, just going there, or logistics, like a particular lab has to be done, or a patient has to travel all the way just to get an EKG done, making it much more simplified, getting information from other institutions that might have, like met your needs. Like they might have had a CT scan done at another institution for whatever reason. Now you're getting another CT scan with another contrast, like 2 days later, things of that nature. I mean, just to make clinical trials simplified for patients to be able to participate. And lastly, I think, education. It's really, there's so much that you can get on the internet, provider education. A lot of general oncologists perhaps are still kind of trying to navigate between different diseases that they treat. And they may need to update their knowledge periodically, but also patients. Patients are empowered these days because there's so much material out there. But then that material, it's how the user uses it. You can get good information. You can get really, like completely incorrect information as well. So just helping the patients get to that point. I think together, all of us, with the same mission and with policies, healthcare policies that match that, I think we will be able to get there. And we've consistently improved. So I think, it'll only continue to improve if we go along the same path.
I totally agree. And I think, it really paints kind of like an optimistic future. I think a lot of those, areas that will get us to better survival rates are, soon hopefully going to be solved. right? Either because the technology is there, because people are empowered to solve these things and they're coming together. I do think that there's a better future ahead, and I appreciate everything that you're doing to help lead that charge. So I know we're almost out of time here, and one of the things that I like to end kind of every show with is this question. What is one thing that you wish like technologists building for oncology, better understood about you, and also vice versa? Like, what is one thing that you wish your peers wish? What do you wish that they knew about technology that would help technologists build for a better future?
Yeah, one of the things that I think I want the technology or technology builders to know about me is that I believe in treating the patient as a whole, not the disease. So it's a lot of information that I need to get, not just the genomic information that we discussed earlier, but where does the patient live? Who do they live with? What is their social support like? Would they be able to comply with the treatment regimens? Some patients, like to travel live 6 months here and 6 months somewhere else, during the winter months. Is that type of a person? How do they perceive about some of the side effects? Like, because each medication has a different side effect. So all of this is important for me, as is the opinion of my colleagues in thoracic oncology, radiation oncology, palliative care. What exactly do they think about this? What are they providing for the patient? So all of this information is important. I do not take one piece of information and run with it. It is a collection of information. So that's what. So for whoever is building the technology, perhaps my plea would be make sure that all of this we are able to access all of this information in the same platform, if not the same page. And for my colleagues who are kind of averse to, or rather really anxious about not, the rapidly advancing technology, I would say, please, move with it, embrace it. There's so much good that could come out of it. It's not all bad. There could be bad stuff, but technology is not a bad thing. There are multiple ways it could help us build as a team. And then if we take away all these things that take up all our time on a daily basis, make things much more seamless, it's much better for us and for our patients and for our mental health. So I think, it is kind of an education, even within my own team, there are members who are like, oh my God, I know that's going to take away my brain. No, it's not. You could definitely can work with your brain, and you can make sure your brain works with it. It's not going to take away your thinking ability. So those are the small suggestions, but I'm pretty sure everyone will start embracing it as time goes on.
I love that. And hopefully you're right. I think AI assisted care is soon going to be better than non AI assisted care. And I don't think the intention is to replace doctors, because, I think the work that you guys do is so incredibly hard that it's going to take years for an AI to be able to replace. I don't think it'll ever replace it. And at the same time, like, the only way that we're able to build those things is if, we really step in the shoes of, your work and what you do every day, and realize that, cancer care is not just reading a textbook and creating an algorithm that follows the textbook, right? It's figuring out how do you actually synthesize all these other confounding variables and present those variables to you in a way that would be actually helpful. So, well, Dr. Seetharamu, thank you so much. I really appreciate all the time that you spent with us today.
Thank you for having me.